The doctors had already stopped trying. In a luxury hospital room, silence had taken over as a billionaire stood helpless, watching his baby daughter slip away with every passing second. Machines beeped slowly, then weaker, like even hope was fading. No one spoke. No one moved. It felt like the end. And then it happened. A thin, tired-looking 13-year-old boy in a worn-out shirt walked into the room. Nobody knew him. Nobody expected him. He wasn't a doctor. He didn't even belong there. But he looked at the baby, noticed something everyone else had missed, and quietly said, "Please check her airway again." At first, they ignored him. But in the next 60 seconds, one decision changed everything. A discovery was made. A small mistake was corrected, and the impossible happened right in front of everyone's eyes. A life came back, and the boy who had nothing became the reason a billionaire didn't lose everything. This is the story of a boy whom the world almost overlooked. A boy who had no permanent home, no wealthy relatives, and no special advantages. Most people passed by him without learning his name. To them, he was just another foster child trying to get through life one day at a time. But what nobody knew was that this boy carried something far more valuable than money. He carried determination. He carried curiosity. And he carried a dream that refused to die. His name was Mason Reed. By the age of 13, Mason had already experienced more loss than many people face in a lifetime. His mother had passed away after a long illness when he was only 10 years old. 2 years later, his father died in a tragic accident. In what felt like a matter of moments, Mason's entire world had fallen apart. After that, life became a series of temporary homes, foster placements, and crowded shelters. Some people were kind. Others barely noticed him. But through every challenge, Mason held onto one thing that gave him hope: learning. While other kids spent their free time playing games or scrolling through social media, Mason spent hours reading books. Any books, every books, especially books about medicine. His fascination with healthcare began when a retired nurse volunteered at a community shelter. She spent an afternoon teaching basic first aid and explaining how doctors save lives during emergencies. Most of the children listened politely and forgot about it the next day. Mason never forgot. Before leaving, the nurse gave him an old medical guide that was missing its cover and several pages. To anyone else, it looked like junk. To Mason, it looked like treasure. That night he read the first chapter, then another, then another. Soon, the worn-out guide became his most prized possession. Every evening, after the shelter lights went out, Mason would sit beneath a blanket with a small flashlight and study the human body. He learned about the heart, the lungs, the brain, and the countless ways doctors help people survive. What Mason didn't know was that one day, something he learned from that book would save a life. Several miles away, Ethan Hartwell lived in a completely different world. Ethan was one of the most successful technology entrepreneurs in the country. His company employed thousands of people and generated millions of dollars every year. He owned luxury homes, drove expensive cars, and had access to opportunities most people could only dream about. Yet none of those things were the center of his world. That honor belonged to his 7-month-old daughter, Lily. Lily was everything to him. Her laughter could brighten his worst day. Her smile could make every problem seem smaller. She wasn't just his daughter. She was his greatest joy. One ordinary Tuesday morning, Ethan was working from home while caring for Lily. The baby sat happily in a cushioned seat near the living room window, while Ethan answered emails and attended virtual meetings. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then his phone rang. An important client needed to discuss an urgent business matter. Ethan stepped into his office for what he believed would be only a few minutes. The call lasted less than 3. When he returned to the living room, his heart nearly stopped. Lily wasn't moving. She wasn't making a sound, and she wasn't breathing. For a moment, Ethan simply froze. His mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. Then panic took over. He rushed to her side and called her name. No response. He gently shook her. Nothing. Within seconds, he dialed emergency services, scooped Lily into his arms, and sprinted toward his car. The drive to the hospital became the longest journey of his life. Every traffic light felt unbearable. Every delay felt cruel. Tears streamed down his face as he spoke to his daughter. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Please stay with me. You're going to be okay." But Lily remained frighteningly still. When they arrived at the hospital, doctors immediately rushed her into the emergency department. Medical professionals moved quickly. Tests were performed. Equipment was attached. Procedures began. Yet despite their efforts, Lily's condition continued to deteriorate. Minutes passed, then more minutes. The room slowly filled with tension. Even the most experienced doctors knew they were running out of options. Meanwhile, several blocks away, Mason sat outside a community center eating breakfast provided by a local charity. As he looked across the street, he noticed a luxury SUV speeding toward the hospital. The driver appeared terrified, and in his arms was a baby. Something about the scene unsettled Mason. He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to follow. By the time he reached the hospital, the vehicle had already disappeared inside the emergency entrance. Mason hesitated briefly before walking through the doors. The hospital corridors buzzed with activity. Nurses hurried between rooms. Doctors spoke urgently into phones. Families waited anxiously for news. As Mason wandered deeper into the building, he noticed a crowd gathered outside an emergency treatment room. Curious, he looked through the partially open door. Inside, he saw Ethan, the same frightened father from the SUV. He saw doctors surrounding a baby girl, and he immediately realized she was fighting for her life. Something made him stay. Something told him not to walk away. As he watched, Mason noticed a tiny movement near Lily's throat. At first, he thought he imagined it. Then he saw it again. A faint reaction. Small. Almost impossible to detect. Instantly, a memory surfaced. One of the chapters from his medical guide discussed infant airway obstructions. The symptoms sounded familiar. His pulse quickened. Could that be what was happening? Surely the doctors had already checked. Surely trained professionals knew more than a 13-year-old foster child. Yet the thought refused to leave his mind. What if they missed something? What if speaking up could help? And what if staying silent meant losing the chance to save a life? Taking a deep breath, Mason stepped into the room. Several staff members turned toward him immediately. A nurse approached. "Young man, you can't be in here." Mason nodded respectfully. Then he spoke. "I think you should check her airway one more time." The room became silent. Doctors exchanged confused looks. The nurse stopped walking. Even Ethan looked up. For a moment, nobody knew what to say. The suggestion seemed unbelievable. A foster child interrupting an emergency medical team. The attending physician studied Mason carefully. "What makes you think that?" he asked. Mason explained what he had noticed. He described the movement. He mentioned the medical guide he had studied countless times. The physician listened, not because he believed a child knew more than trained doctors, but because they had exhausted nearly every option available, and because something about Mason's confidence felt genuine. Finally, the physician nodded. "Let's take another look." The room sprang back into action. Doctors performed another examination. Seconds felt like hours. Everyone watched. Nobody spoke. Then one doctor suddenly looked up. "I found something." The atmosphere changed instantly. Medical staff moved quickly. Additional procedures were performed. The obstruction was removed. The room held its breath. Then, Lily coughed, a weak sound at first, then another, then another. Moments later, a loud cry filled the room. Relief exploded across every face. Nurses smiled. Doctors exhaled. Several people wiped away tears, and Ethan Hartwell collapsed into a chair as emotion overwhelmed him. His daughter was alive. The nightmare was over. While everyone focused on Lily, Mason quietly picked up his backpack and headed toward the hallway. He wasn't looking for recognition. He wasn't expecting rewards. He simply felt grateful that the little girl had survived. But before he reached the elevator, a voice called after him. "Wait!" Mason turned. Ethan stood behind him. The billionaire's eyes were filled with gratitude. "What is your name?" he asked. "Mason Reed." Ethan extended his hand. "Thank you, Mason." Neither of them realized it at the time. But that simple conversation would change both of their lives forever. For a few seconds, neither Ethan nor Mason spoke. The hallway was quiet compared to the chaos that still filled the emergency room behind them. Doctors and nurses continued caring for Lily, but Ethan couldn't stop thinking about the boy standing in front of him. The boy who had stepped forward when everyone else had given up. The boy who had noticed something that nobody else had seen. "What were you doing here?" Ethan finally asked. Mason adjusted the strap of his worn backpack. "I saw you driving to the hospital," he replied honestly. "You looked scared. I followed because, I don't know, something told me I should." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. Most people would have walked away. Most people would have minded their own business. Yet somehow this child had chosen to follow a complete stranger during the worst moment of his life. "What about your parents?" Ethan asked gently. The question caused Mason's eyes to lower toward the floor. "I don't have any." The answer hit Ethan harder than he expected. Over the next 30 minutes, he learned Mason's story. He learned about the loss of his parents, the foster homes, the shelters, the donated clothes, the uncertainty of never knowing where he might be living a month from now. But what surprised Ethan most wasn't Mason's hardship. It was his attitude. There was no bitterness, no anger, no self-pity. Instead, Mason spoke about books, about learning, about science, about his dream of becoming a doctor one day. When he mentioned the old medical guide that had helped him recognize Lily's symptoms, Ethan couldn't help but smile. "You learned all of that from a donated book?" he asked. Mason nodded. "And from reading everything else I can find." For the first time in years, Ethan felt genuinely inspired. Throughout his career, he had built companies by identifying potential in people and ideas. But the potential standing before him felt different. This wasn't talent created by opportunity. This was talent that had survived without opportunity, and that made it even more remarkable. Before they parted ways that day, Ethan handed Mason a business card. "If you ever need anything, call me." Mason looked at the card. Then he carefully placed it inside his backpack. He thanked Ethan and left. What neither of them knew was that the story was only beginning. A week later, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Mason. Every time he looked at Lily, he remembered the boy who had helped save her life. Eventually, he contacted several foster care organizations and located Mason's caseworker. What he learned concerned him. Despite Mason's intelligence, his academic performance was beginning to suffer. Not because he lacked ability, because he lacked stability. Frequent moves between foster placements had disrupted his education. Many teachers had never even realized how gifted he was. Ethan decided something needed to change. Within weeks, he partnered with a nonprofit organization that specialized in supporting foster youth. Together, they arranged a stable foster placement with a caring family known for helping children succeed. For the first time in years, Mason had a bedroom of his own. A desk, a bookshelf, and a quiet place to study. The first night in his new room, Mason simply sat on the bed looking around. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't luxurious. But to him, it felt like a palace. For the first time in a long time, he felt safe. That night, he opened his old medical guide and smiled. The pages were worn. The cover was damaged, but it had carried him this far, and now, perhaps, it would carry him even further. Over the next few years, Mason flourished. His teachers quickly realized they were dealing with an extraordinary student. He absorbed information faster than most of his classmates. He asked thoughtful questions. He stayed after class to learn more. And whenever he encountered something difficult, he worked until he understood it. By 14, he was winning regional science competitions. By 15, he was attending advanced educational programs designed for gifted students. By 16, local newspapers began writing articles about the foster child, whose academic achievements were attracting attention across the state. Yet success never changed him. Whenever reporters asked about his accomplishments, Mason always mentioned the people who helped him along the way. The volunteer nurse who gave him the medical guide, the librarians who recommended books, the foster parents who encouraged him, and the businessman who believed in him when few others did. Meanwhile, Lily Hartwell was growing into a bright, energetic little girl. Every year on the anniversary of her hospital recovery, Ethan invited Mason to celebrate with the family. The tradition became something everyone looked forward to. Lily especially adored Mason. As she grew older, Ethan told her the story of the day they met. She listened with wide eyes every time. To Lily, Mason wasn't famous because he appeared in newspapers. He was special because he cared. One afternoon, when Lily was 8 years old, she asked her father a question. "Dad, why did Mason help us if he didn't know us?" Ethan smiled. "Because good people help others even when they don't have to." The answer stayed with her for years. Time continued moving forward. Mason graduated at the top of his high school class. Universities from across the country offered scholarships. Professors praised his intelligence. Mentors admired his determination. But there was only one path he wanted to follow: medicine. The dream that began with a damaged book and a flashlight beneath a blanket. Years later, on the day of his medical school graduation, a large auditorium filled with applause as Mason walked across the stage. The audience rose to their feet. Among them sat Ethan and Lily. Both looked incredibly proud. After receiving his diploma, Mason stepped to the podium to deliver the student address. The room fell silent. He looked around at the faces watching him, then he began. "People often ask how I got here." A smile appeared on his face. "The truth is, I didn't get here alone." He spoke about kindness, about opportunity, about the power of education, and about the importance of believing in people before the world recognizes their value. Then he shared a lesson he had learned long ago. "Never judge someone by what they own," he said. "Never assume that a person has nothing to offer because of where they come from. Sometimes the person who changes your life is someone the world barely notices." Many people wiped away tears. Ethan certainly did. As the applause thundered through the auditorium, Mason glanced toward the audience. His eyes found Ethan and Lily. The family smiled back. And in that moment, all three understood something powerful. A single act of courage had saved a life. A single act of kindness had changed another. And together, those moments had created a future none of them could have imagined. Because sometimes miracles don't arrive wearing white coats. Sometimes they arrive carrying a worn backpack filled with dreams. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more inspiring stories of courage, kindness, and life-changing moments. Thank you for being part of our community.